Assalamualaikum and good morning to all. A warm welcome to everyone here at this MTA studio and also those who are online. Welcome to MTA's webinar on the National Budget 2023. It was a long-awaited and finally, on the 24th of February, the Finance Minister, Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim, has unveiled the revised National 2023 budget, which was the largest spending ever to be tabled at Parliament, at the amount of 388.1 billion. Along with this budget, the slogan Malaysia Madani or Civil Malaysia was introduced. According to the STAR, it is about reforming Malaysia into a country that believes in humanity and good values. Speaking of good values, you must be aware that MTA has launched its VBIT roadmap in mid-2022. This roadmap is the industry commitment to creating value for Takaful operators, the government, the regulator, and also the society. And this is exactly how we will be approaching the elements in the national budget. There is so much to talk about from the national budget, but we will be looking at it from the perspective of the country, the community, and finally the Takaful industry specifically, in layman's terms. With us today, we have three distinguished panelists who will take us through each of these three perspectives. We have with us Mr. Bernard Yap, Head of Private Client Services and Financial Services within the tax practice in Ernst & Young Malaysia. We have also with us Muhammad Faris Muhammad Farouk, the Executive Director of Deloitte Malaysia's Business Tax Practice. And last but not least, Encik Muhammad Tirmizi Yu, who is the Vice President and Head of Business Development and Special Projects in Malaysian Reinsurance Berhad. So thank you all for being here today, and let's begin. So we will begin with our first panelist, Mr. Bernard. I'll give a bit of a profile about Mr. Bernard here. Mr. Bernard was actually the indirect tax leader within Ernst & Young Malaysia that led the GST implementation in Malaysia. He has been actively involved in compliance, regulatory and consultancy engagements for Malaysian financial institutions together with entrepreneurs and their business enterprises. He works with the EY Global Tax Policy Network to help develop and implement policy initiatives, both as an external and internal advisor to governments and regulators. And he has assisted local and international banks in the implementation of Common Reporting Standards, CRS, in Malaysia. Mr. Bernard is also involved in the submission of numerous GST memorandums and discussions with the Tax Review Panel and Bank Negara Malaysia on GST for financial services, both for conventional and Islamic banks and insurance and Takaful operators. So Mr. Bernard will be our first panelist for today. Mr. Bernard, the National Budget 2023 is pro-growth, with many industries touched upon. From your perspective, please provide an overview of how this budget will look like for the country in the coming year, and what are the areas that would gain the most benefits?
Okay. Firstly, thank you very much to MTA for the invitation to be on this as a panel speaker. I guess when you look at overall the Malaysian budget that was introduced, the first part of it is very much on how do we then be able to be more sustainable and recover post-COVID, because this should be the first year where everything opens up. When I talk about the local economy, everybody's now strengthening and growing and recovering from COVID, and also the opening of the global economy. Malaysia, as one of the strong member of OECD, obviously will want to participate a lot more in that respect. The first industry I think I will focus on is very much the SME sector. The SME sector actually represents statistically close to about 46% of the overall economy, contributes from an economy perspective, the largest employer in the sector, in the Malaysian economy. And so hence, therefore, it was very important that the Malaysian government acknowledges the fact that the SME sector would be the area of focus for them, because these are the ones that would not only be very important to the community because of employment and the multiplier effect to it, plus the second part as well is because of the fact that coming out of COVID, we must make sure that we are able to then be able to compete again. One of the main things that the contribution or the focus from the government is actually looking at automation and digitalization for the SME sector. We know foreign workers is always going to be a challenge. So therefore, the encouragement is we're setting aside a lot of grants, a lot of loans to make sure that the SMEs now appreciate that automation and digital framework system that they've managed to go through during COVID. While a lot of us relied on foreign workers, I think SME learned to be able to adapt during COVID and therefore ensure that they automate certain part of their business. So I think that's the first part, SME. Obviously, the second one, main focus will be the tourism, because of the fact that I think all the countries around the world now is opening up. Everybody's going to be on a very much targeted spending and traveling overseas, including myself as well. And so therefore, I think Malaysia should be one of the beneficiaries where we would have a lot more tourism coming in. And given that, then we must make sure that our facilities, our infrastructure, the whole entire ecosystem is ready to embrace and take in these tourists. And I think then the third one is very much on sustainability across all industries. It's not very specific. It's more of ESG. How do we make sure that we are becoming more and more environmentally friendly? And there's a lot of grants and also a lot of focus given to not just SMEs, any entities that undertake ESG activities to make sure that they are sustainable over the longer years. I think that's going to be appreciative. The other last bit, I think it's very important. I talk about SMEs very importantly trying to adapt, digitalize, and automate a lot of their functions and their processes within the organization. It is then important us, the Malaysians, are also individually changing ourselves. And hence, there were a lot of allocations to the education system, making sure that the vocational and the training institutions are equipped to make sure that they're able to change and make sure that they're able to educate and our people to be able to adapt technology in front of them. So while the SME and the organization, the corporate organizations continue to want to change, to adapt to technology, we individuals, Malaysians, should also be able to be forthcoming and open-minded and be able to adapt that changes. And hence, we need to retrain ourselves to be able to be more IT savvy. I always end and say that, my son is actually being more IT savvy than I am, and I'm actually learning from him. So I think we just have to be open and be able to learn and adapt to it.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Burnett. Our second panelist for the day, Encik Faris, is an executive director of Deloitte Malaysia's business tax practice with more than 16 years experience in business tax compliance and advisory. Faris also holds the positions of government and public sector and government-linked companies, deputy leader and tax audit and investigation co-leader in Deloitte Malaysia. His industry focus is the financial services industry with an emphasis on Islamic finance and public sector clients. He has also been involved in various international tax assignments. He has advised various asset management companies on their international investment structures involving countries in addition to Malaysia, such as Singapore, Cayman Islands, Japan, Ireland, Hong Kong, and now BEPS, and how BEPS could affect their international investment structure. Encik Faris, apart from the several industries that the budget touches upon, it also includes benefit for several segments of the rakyat, being a Malaysia Madani budget. Two segments which were addressed for the first times are inmates and the M40 segment, which have been affected by the pandemic. Could we ask you to give us an overview of what the various segments of the community can look forward to in the coming year?
Okay, thank you. Firstly, thank you, MTA, for having me today. Right? I'm quite surprised to see that ex-convicts and as well as the M40 are given a certain emphasis in this budget. So if you look at ex-convicts and prisoners, the government is trying to support them to be integrated into the society. Right? So there are programs, training through the skill for inmate programs being offered, And I think one interesting part is the Agro Penjara program, where I see that it is at the same time addressing the concept of ESG, right, whereby 70 hectares of prison land to be given 10 million allocation for the prisoners to do agriculture activities. Right? And from the corporate tax perspective, there is a corporate tax deductions or further tax deductions given. So every $1 incurred to employ ex-convicts and ex-inmates, right, will be given ringgit deduction against the income of the corporations. Right? So, and other segments also are being addressed by the government. Like, for example, there are similar deductions were introduced for employing senior citizens, and as well as former national sports athletes. Right? So that's the specific segment. But if we look into a more broader segment, right? The T20, M40, B40, right? But at an overall outset, I'm very glad that the government did not decided not to implement GST. So I think that's a very, I would say, debated point that have been around since past couple of years, right? So it's a very bold move from the government. I think GST will be too big for the rakyat to absorb at this juncture, that post recovery of COVID. And I'm also, I would say, pleased to see that the government is trying to address the right point rather than introducing a huge tax like GST. The government is looking into increasing the income of the rakyat, addressing the income issue of the rakyat, right? And as well as providing a good platform or a platform for the businesses to prosper within the country, right? And at the same time, if we look from the T20, the government is trying to look into a fairer revenue distribution, right? Whereby the T20 group is expected to, I would say, to share a certain responsibility together in building the nation, in addressing the less fortunate segment of the society. Right? And as you can see that the expansion of the current tax base more leaning towards the T20 segment. Right? One of the angle is the introduction of the luxury goods tax. Right? Although we have not seen, I would say, they have not really issued specific guidelines for it, but we know that it's targeted towards the consumption tax of the T20, right? Where they will probably consume more luxury items, right? And this, and also the government is also shifting the revenue from the T20 to the M40, right? Whereby there is a reduction in individual income tax for the M40, right? Which will allow a more disposable income, I think up to about 1,300 ringgit for each individual, to be thrown back to the economy. Right? At the same time, an increase of tax rate for income above than 100,000 ringgit, right? By about a scale rate of 0.5% to 2%, that which will affect a few segments of the community, right? And I think at the moment the government is expecting that it will affect about 150,000 of taxpayers or T20 taxpayers. Right? When it comes to the M40 segment, right? There are also certain specific measures that are quite relevant to the M40. Right? We can see that the government is trying to address also giving stamp duty exemptions, right? Especially on the transfer of immovable property between family members. Right? The proposal is to give full exemption of stamp duty on property value up to 1 million ringgit. Right? Transfer between parent and child, and also now it's extended to grandparent to grandchildren. Right? and or between grandparent and grandchildren. And there is also a 75% stamp duty exemption on instrument of transfer of property and loan agreement for first-time house buyers. So I guess this is to encourage the M40 to own properties to support the livelihood of the M40. What else from the B40 segment? I guess 80% of the budget trying to address the M40. This and this is very well expected, where the government is trying to focus on fulfilling the economic needs of the M40 of the B40, right? And as well as I think Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim also mentioned that the government is, I would say, determined to eradicating the hardcore poor of the country, right? And it's not just the government will provide direct assistance, but at the same time getting the I would say the private sectors to also support the government initiatives to look into the corporate social responsibility in addressing the B40 segment. Right? And I think another segment that I'm quite also pleased to see is that the measures that have been proposed to addressing or minimizing the cost of living. This will generally affect the B40 and 40, you know, the through more targeted subsidies and assistance and as well as incentives. At the same time, I think there is also this Payung Rahmah concept. Right? We know that recently there is this, you know, the menu Rahmah of RM5, and now there is also this Jualan Rahmah for, you know, some essential goods, right? Will be given up to even 30% cheaper than its market price, right? And at the same time also I think food security is a bit of a concern. You know, that there's the food inflation index is quite high. Right? The government is trying to look into measures into addressing the food security, which will benefit not just the B40 and as well as the whole rakyat.
All right. Thank you so much, Sheikh Faris. I think we are all glad that there is no implementation of the GST, yeah, and happy to know that we will be looking forward to more inclusiveness and equality in the coming year. Moving on to our third panelist, Encik Muhammad Tirmizi Yu is the Vice President and Head of Business Development and Special Projects in the Malaysian Reinsurance Berhad, Malaysian Re. He holds a Master in Business Administration from RMIT University and a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Michigan under Petronas Scholarship. He has accumulated 2 decades of working experience in capacities ranging from corporate planning and strategy, special projects, management consulting, and business development. He also worked in KPMG in business advisory before joining Malaysian Re in 2011 and assuming his current role in 2018. Encik Tirmizi, after hearing how the budget would look like for the country and the rakyat in general, please provide some views of how it would affect the Takaful industry in specific.
Okay. First of all, Assalamualaikum and very good morning. Thank you, Pondin, the moderator. Also, I'm glad to have the company of my esteemed colleagues from the Big Four firms. So they are the economists and also the tax experts. So thank you so much for doing all the heavy lifting. So clearing the path for me to give a view from the industry point of view. I think upon a careful study of the budget, I would say that the view of the industry on the budget is quite neutral. I think we have to go back to understand the motivation why this budget was developed by the government in the first place. And we have to remember this is actually not the first original 2023 budget because it had already been tabled previously, a few days before the dissolution of the parliament back in November. Understanding the motivation is important because then it will explain why certain things are there for the industry in the budget and certain things have been removed from the previous budget. So if we go back to, during the election days back in November, this is, the post-pandemic recovery era. And then, the people highest priority would be on the addressing the high cost of living. I think even the basic food items such as chicken and cheap source of protein such as eggs, not only were getting expensive, but they were also getting, scarce to find. I remember driving to get eggs a few months ago. It's a bit difficult to have to drive to a few shops, and then most of the shops were just done with tak ada telur hari ni bang, sorry. Okay, all right. So this is the first priority. And then if you look at the business community, the businesses, especially the SMEs, were struggling to keep afloat. They were struggling with the revenue generation. They were struggling with the liquidity, with the cash flow. So all these were in the mind of the voters when we went to the election back in November. And I believe the mandate that was given to the government was adequately addressed in this budget. And unfortunately, it also has come at the expense to some extent to the industry, because if we are honest, if we're being totally honest about it, in terms of the spending on the Takaful and insurance products, it's probably not on the highest priority for the rakyat when they give the mandate to this government. So if Puan Lin, the moderator, can put the slide on. I have a slide. If he can put the slide on the page. So I believe this mandate was adequately reflected. In fact, I've gone back to the previous two budgets to compare some of the goodies for the Takaful and the insurance industries. And then you can look actually the progression from budget 2022 to the original budget 2023 and the revised budget 2023. So you can see, even in terms of the number of items of goodies for the Takaful industry, they have been on the reducing term. Look at budget 2022. At the time, the focus was on the expansion of Pelindungan Tenang, which is a micro insurance program. And then there was also the removal of the stamp duty for the Pelindungan Tenang. And then also the expansion for the My Salam scheme. And also that year, the government actually introduced a insurance protection scheme to farmers, covering about 1 million of farmers across Malaysia. And then back in October, when the government presented this budget, the original budget, the expansion of the Pelindungan Tenang was actually still on the agenda. In fact, they actually were they're expanding the scope to include the coverage of the flood. And then the My Salam was still there, but they introduced something new. This is actually the government called it expansion of the scope of tax relief for the insurance premium of life, by including the voluntary contribution to the EPF of up to 3,000. So you can see in terms of the progression, from 4 items, 3 items, and now we're going to this current budget. All those items, the goodie items previously in those previous budgets, have been removed, with the exception of the expansion of the scope of tax relief for life insurance, with the inclusion of the voluntary contribution to the EPF. However, there is one additional new item, which is the creation of the Pelindungan protection. This is called Lindung Plus program, which will be a collaboration with the insurance and Takaful providers. So it provides the additional social security protection for income above 5,000 and medical treatments, and also protection for chronic diseases. So, all right. So here I want to give credit to the industry and also to the government for the foresight when they introduced the microinsurance program, which is the Pelindungan Tenang. So just a bit of background, Pelindungan Tenang was actually launched in 2017 by Bank Negara, and also with collaboration with the industry of insurance and Takaful. However, up until 2021, 4 years after the launch of this microinsurance program, the take-up rate was very low. I remember at the time when Malaysian Re was invited to be the project administrator and also the project manager for this national program. We were surprised because we saw the take-up rate at the time, after 4 years of launch, only 46,000 policyholders were actually in the program. So we were talking about close to 10 million of the B40 segment. So we're talking about a penetration rate of less than 0.5%. So the government introduced this Perlindungan Tengah Voucher Fund back in 2021. So we launched it in September 2021. Under this program, the government actually provided a subsidy. They cover up to 50 ringgit of this program. And this program is actually very affordable to the B40 segment. You only have to pay between 30 ringgit to 80 ringgit. And then you get a sum insured covered between 10,000 to 80,000. So 30 to 80 ringgit per year, it translates between 3 ringgit to 7 ringgit per month. So it's very affordable. So after the launch of this subsidy program of the Perlindungan Tengah Voucher Fund, the take-up rate actually skyrocketed. So from 46,000, when we closed the program back in November last year, 2022, only just barely a year after it being introduced, the take-up rate actually went up from 46,000 to 4 million. So 4 million of the B40 population were getting this Perlindungan Tengah protection program. So I believe this is a success story that has to be replicated, and it's something that the industry can take pride in rolling out, and also getting So we're talking about close to 50% of the B40 getting the insurance coverage. Again, going back from penetration rate of less than 0.5% to close to 50%. Also, if you look at it from the microeconomic point of view, essentially the government spent in total 200 million ringgit for this Perlindungan Tengah voucher program. However, in terms of the total sum insured for the whole B40 segment, the industry was covering between 60 to 200 billion. So essentially, it's a risk transfer from the government. I pay the industry 200 million, but in exchange, the Takaful industry and the insurance industry are providing a coverage up to 60 to 200 billion. So if you look at even a simple cost-benefit ratio, I think this is an excellent initiative by the government. All right, so now we're talking about those two goodies currently in the budget. So if you look at the tax relief, the expansion for the voluntary EPF, this is understandable because during the 4 rounds of withdrawal from the EPF, about 150 billion of the EPF money was actually withdrawn by the rakyat, during the pandemic era. So there is obviously a critical need to replenish this fund. So hence this so-called expansion of the scope for the voluntary EPF. But if we're looking at it strictly from the industry point of view, it is essentially the premium from the life insurance and the family Takaful is crowded out by this tax relief for a voluntary EPF. And then I believe most people, would prioritize the EPF savings over the life insurance for this segment. However, I believe this is a temporary measure. So perhaps next year, it can be split and back to the original arrangement. And then let's cover on the Lindung Plus program. So this is the expansion of those income earners above 5,000 per month. So here in Malaysia, we're talking about 60 million of workforce. So 40-20, so about 60% of that will be coming from the M40 and T20 group. So about 9.6 million of the salaried workers. So assuming the same rate of contribution of SOSCO applies, which is 1.75% from the employers and then 0.5% from the employees. So just a simple math, we are looking at a total monthly contribution of 1.98 billion per month, which is 23.8 billion per year. So I don't know, because the details of this arrangement with the private insurance and Takaful operators have not been made public yet. But even if we're looking at a simple, 50-50 co-insurance arrangement, so the industry is looking at potentially 12 billion of premium and contribution available for the industry. So this is something huge for the industry. To be honest, probably I could stop here because those are only the 2 points. However, I think this is where the industry has to be resourceful and creative and innovative in finding those sorts of businesses that are not directly explicitly mentioned in the budget. So where are the potential businesses? So, I would cover the easy things first. In terms of the there will be more discretionary spending, especially from the M40 income tax earner, between 35 to 100,000 of the tax brackets. So we're looking up potentially up to 1,300 per tax earner in terms of the saving per year. So we look at the profile of these people, making between 3,000 to 7,000, 8,000 per year. So there are some potential customer segments that we can actually approach. So those with young family, who just recently married couple who are expecting the first child, for example. So they might want to upgrade from a motorcycle to cars, and then they also might want to purchase their first house. And then they also, okay, now I have a responsibility. My child is coming out. So what if something happens to me? So the father and the mother, might be thinking, maybe it's finally time to get the family takaful, the life insurance that people have been telling us to do for years. But if you were single, there's not much of incentive or motivation to do it. But now you have, and then you also have that discretionary extra income from the tax savings. So this is where I believe the industry, the segment of population that the industry can approach. And then the second thing is that I'm also quite excited about this. This is the IPR, the People Income Initiative, which is I think is a first step towards the universal basic income, where for the hardcore poor segment, the government will be actually topping up their income. So they will be making at least a minimum 2,500 ringgit per month. So I mentioned that the Perlindungan Tenang was removed from the budget, but because of this universal basic income program, if these hardcore poor people are making 2,500 ringgit per month, it's more than enough to actually continue with their micro insurance program, which is the Perlindungan Tenang. As I mentioned, that it only costs between 3 to 7 ringgit per month. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I must say, the information and views provided thus far by our esteemed panelists are really enlightening and interesting. I just have to ask more questions, and I'm sure all our listeners are also eager to know more. So back to you, Mr. Burnett. Can I ask you a different question, another question, please, which is, there appears to be a shift in the taxation policies, which will affect many industries. Perhaps you could explain a bit about this for the layman.
Sure. I guess my fellow panelists also mentioned about it. It's very much a progressive tax policy. I think the agenda and the theme from the budget 2023 was looking at how the T20 group will be able to contribute and sustain the economy by also contributing back to the B40 and the M40s. In simple language, I think if you want to call it, that could be like a Robin Hood when your budget or tax system. So we've seen increase in the tax rates for the T20, but also we've seen a decrease in the tax rates for the M40 and B40. But also what's very important in that is that the government was very much focused on making sure that whatever tax revenue collection that they have, we make sure that we give it back and allocate it back to the B40s, as mentioned by a lot of times during this discussion. Cost of doing business, cost of living has gone up, and this is a fact that I think we have to acknowledge. Given that, then very importantly, then what would happen is that the introduction of new taxes, we mentioned about the luxury good tax. That's one area that is going to be helping the government to increase the tax revenue collection. The potential capital gains tax coming in from 2024 onwards, that's going to be another avenue for the government to make sure that they're able to expand their revenue collection. But I guess then the other bit is also it's a long-term strategy. It's a journey that we're starting, is where the government is actually going through what we call a targeted subsidy reform, which means that instead of having today where the subsidies are available to everybody, let's make sure that we allocate the subsidy to the targeted consumer or targeted corporate players that actually requires it. So we're looking at now potentially coming up is the the utility bills. How do we then make sure that the allocation is given to the low income household? So we've got the B40 group. How do we then define and be able to capture the right low income household that will be able to benefit better and giving more savings back to them. So I actually compliment on this kind of reforms, because at the end of the day, in order to achieve a balanced budget, so you're talking back from both the consumer and from the government perspective, the only way to achieve a balanced budget is to ensure that whatever allocations that the government can provide goes to the rightful community and rightful targeted group, plus also not overspending it, because those who can afford it shouldn't, whether the question is, should they be receiving those subsidies? So I think that's the main part of it. The second part of it is also looking at Inland Revenue is now targeted to do what we call a voluntary program, which means that they're encouraging taxpayers to come forward to do the right thing. If you have not filed your income tax properly, do voluntarily come up and do the voluntary disclosure and pay the rightful tax. And that's consistent with what the ESG framework is: governance and transparency, making sure that taxpayers are not afraid to come forward whenever there's a necessary thing to do. And the good part about this is that the government is very much focused is make sure you contribute the right amount of taxes. We will then give you the exemption or no penalties at all in coming forward to do the right thing. And that's very good, so that we are now into a more compliance regime rather than hiding away. Now that's on the voluntary part. I guess the last bit is with technology. I always mention about technology and digital. Inland Revenue and MOF should have access to a lot more information today to make sure that they be able to use those information and data collected from all the various government agencies to how do we cover and discover the black economy, right? We have today, very simple. One example will be very simple: e-wallets. E-wallets are being used by a lot of traders and SME and service industry. And that's just how that at the end of the day, do they pay the rightful amount of tax? We can use the e-wallets, the data that we can gather, and making sure that they reflect those information into their own personal returns, right? I think it's fair that if you do earn the money and you're using technology and everything, the government should also use that same basis of information to track and trace those black economy that have not been contributing back to the tax revenue collections. Yeah, so that's one very good example. And I guess the last bit is very much on the foreign source income that has been introduced. Malaysia wants to look at and see whether foreign source income, encouraging the Malaysians to return, to bring back the foreign source income. And they've given the exemption for the next 5 years. So there are exemptions available in terms of individuals and corporates that are bringing back foreign source income. And if you can bring that back and contribute back to the Malaysian economy, the next 5 years, there are rules and exemptions available for you. So I think overall, the tax system being Malaysian government is very much also catered to see what's the trends, what's the happenings because of COVID and post-COVID, like I talk about digitalization, automation. They should be using this kind of trends and this kind of data to ensure that they are able to do the right thing, making sure taxpayers are compliant, coming up to do the right thing. Plus also, I've always mooted that the black economy has to come up to contribute back to the Malaysian revenue collection. Yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Bernard. We understand completely what you are trying to inform us about the taxing of the rich and targeted subsidiary for those who need. And that shows that, it is a very inclusive, very pro-growth budget that we are looking at this time. Encik Faris, earlier you did mention about some of the benefits for the community. A lot of goodies that are coming our way. But how can these benefits be measured? And are there any multiplier effects for the long run?
Thank you for the question. I think in terms of measurement of impact, we need to probably look into what are the problem statements in place, right? So in the first part of the budget speech that Sri Anwar Ibrahim highlighted, the challenges that the Malaysian economy is facing, right? So there are quite a number of challenges. That there is a high debt burden, decline in governance, the global economy uncertainty, as well as investments have not recovered to pre-pandemic levels. And finally, this main thing is the economy challenges that are affecting the rakyat, right? So a problem statement is inflation rate is very high. It's at 3.3% at the moment. And food inflation rate is even higher, is at 5.8%. And I think another angle to look at is the unemployment rate, especially for our youth, right, which is age probably 25, around 25 and below. The unemployment rate is, for youth unemployment is about 10%, and overall unemployment rate is at 3.6%, right? And what's also worrying is the unemployment, the underemployment, right, whereby of the youth, whereby about an average income of 1.7 thousand ringgit, right, per month. So this is quite worrying. So if we look into the problem statement, then probably the main, I would say, KPI for the government are to reduce those rates and problems at an overall level. But of course, then we look into the, I would say, the smaller measurement, right? Whereby just now I have mentioned that, okay, we talk about the government is trying to widening the revenue base by collecting extra taxes from the T20, right? So this should reflect into the additional collection. So with additional tax, I guess the spillover effects also to the rakyat and back to the country. And also for specific, what do you call it, specific impact on certain segment group of the rakyat in terms of the special initiatives that were introduced. Right? If we look into measures to eradicate the poor, right, to eliminate the hardcore poor by end of the year. I think that was a strong statement made by Dr. Sri Anwar. So I guess these are the smaller KPIs that needs to be met by the government of Malaysia. And on top of that, if you look from the business perspective, there are other KPIs like increase in FDI and prospering the certain segments of the economy, like in terms of the high-tech industry and as well as the agriculture industry.
Thank you so much. It is certainly something that we can look forward to then. Okay, Encik Termizi, you spoke before on the overall of how this budget will affect the Takaful industry. But let's get into a bit more specifics here. The budget has a specific section addressing ESG and Bernard's favorite word, digitalization, and also healthcare.
Okay.
How would these three areas specifically be relevant to the industry?
Okay, thank you for the question. So, in terms of the ESG is still, pretty much is still an evolving area. So there's still a lot of the new knowledge that we are still learning. But most of the focus are currently in the environment, part of the ESG. So we look at the budget. One of the focus areas will be on the flood mitigating projects. So there will be a retendering of 6 projects. That will result in saving up to 2 billion. So speaking of flood, because of the climate change, so the world is getting warmer. So there will be greater precipitation. So there will be the storm and is getting stronger and more frequent. And then even if you I have a sister-in-law currently in Johor. So usually they don't get flooded in Johor, in that part of area in March. But the house actually went up to this chest level last night, and we have not been able to contact her and the family since last night. I hope they are okay. So speaking of this flood, we look at the recent Great Malaysian Flood in 2021. So it actually exposed the seriousness of the protection gap for the country. For that GMF, the Great Malaysian Flood 2021, GMF 2021, the total economic loss for the whole country was about 6.5 billion. But only the total insured loss was only 2.2 billion. So approximately 70% of those losses were uninsured. And then perhaps this is the point that in the original budget, in terms of the extension of the flood coverage under the Perlindungan Tenang should be revived. And then the second approach that the industry could approach this is via a formation of a flood pool, a national flood pool. So in terms of the arrangement, perhaps it can be a co-insurance deal with the government. So the government covers 50% and the industry covers 50%. So this is something, an area that to be looked into, in terms of the flood mitigating management. Also in terms of the impact on the environment, then we're looking at on the push for the EV, the electric vehicles. So I think the electric vehicles, even though people like me, the environmental conscious, educated people, they tend to be, more supportive of this environmental agenda. But I think two prohibitive factors usually are the high cost of the EVs. I've looked actually last night. I couldn't find any new EV in the market that costs below 100,000. So everything is about 100,000. So that's number one prohibitive factor. And then the second thing is that on the availability, because we know that in terms of the EV charging facility, it's limited. So I'm glad the government is actually addressing it through various initiatives in the budget. So hopefully that in terms of lowering the EV cost, it can be achieved if we can have more of those EVs priced under 100,000. It'll be good for the mass. So what will be the impact on the Takaful insurance is that currently these are tariffed. So it's not like the industry can just price it according to the risk. So everything is tariff. So there's a certain fixed price and it's based on the CC and also the sum insured. So I think one way to encourage the purchase of this EV among the masses would be on the perhaps lowering on the tariff for on the insurance on this EV. And then also we're looking at the green technology. So I understand in the budget there's a green technology financing scheme, with the allocation of 3 billion. And then there's also the allocation of Khazanah to invest in green-friendly projects. And also, for Bank Negara to provide financing up to 2 billion to support the green tech startups. So this is, and then we're looking at the overall green supply energy to the country. This is not in the budget, but if you look at the Sustainable Energy Development Authority of Malaysia, SEDA, so in 2020, the renewable energy only forms 22% of the installed power capacity in Malaysia. So the plan is in 12 years' time, by 2035, they actually plan to increase this to 40%. So what would this say? And obviously there will be more solar power stations to be built, and then look more in terms of the manufacturing of the solar PV panels. So financing is one thing, technology is one thing, know-how is one thing, but how about the risk management? So this is where the insurance and Takaful could help, because when you building a solar power station, for example, so the Takaful and insurance can provide the coverage during the construction of that facilities itself, and then also during the operations. If there's something goes wrong with the machine or it catches fire, so it's also will be covered by the insurance and Takaful. And then also most importantly, but very underrated in Malaysia, is the business interruptions. So we know that, for example, most of these power facilities, they are tied with the long-term loan. So they still have to service that loan, that sukuk or bond, even though, let's say, the power plant is not operational. So what do we do in between? Get the insurance and Takaful coverage. Also, one of our panelists mentioned about the food security. Thank you for the point. So if you look at the food security, again, this is where in terms of the Takaful and insurance protection is severely lacking. For example, you look at the budget, the previous two budgets, there was a insurance protection scheme for the farmers, but it has been removed. But during the production stage, it's crucial for these farmers to have some sort of insurance and Takaful protection. Because let's say if the crops are destroyed by a drought or by flood, then the farmers will be actually unable to get the capital to be invested. So basically the food chain will actually stop there, because they are able to regrow the crops. But what happens if they have the insurance or Takaful protection, so they can get the monetary claims and then reinvest and regrow those crops? So at least that part of food security is covered. And then we're also looking at the whole food value chain of the food security, the logistics, and then the retail, the markets, even the consumption. I mean, this is something that we don't see much in Malaysia, but it's quite common in the developed countries. What if those foods that we buy from the supermarket, for example, is poisonous, or so then people get sick. So and then those products have to be recalled, and it will come at a cost to those producers. So this is currently mostly not covered in Malaysian market. And also Bernard's framework, digitalization. So various initiatives to promote, to encourage the digitalization of the process, including a few billions grant part under Bank Negara. So but if you look at the cyber risk is also currently underutilized in Malaysia. In fact, the coverage for the whole country is less than 1%. There's a finding from Bank Negara back in 2021 that only 15% of the SMEs actually have some sort of the cyber coverage. And then in terms of the potential impact, a single loss from a cyber claim can actually increase the industry loss ratio up to 250%. So perhaps before we even tackle those SMEs, we can start on a smaller scale for the learning curve. So maybe we can start with the individual coverage for the cyber insurance. We can start something as small as 2,000 ringgit sum insured. So yes.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It certainly looks like the Takaful industry has our work cut out for us this year.
Yes.
But from what you have mentioned, there is a lot of new areas that we can actually try to go into.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm very happy to inform that we have questions that we have received online. I'm not going to put any of you on the spot by targeting the question to you, but I'm going to ask the question and just leave it open and hope that one of you would volunteer and answer. All right, the first question, yeah. Dear panelists, noted that Malaysia will implement Pillar 2 and enact QDMTT in 2024. Can you please share with us your opinion? Is Malaysia ready with the said approach?
Okay, let me take this because it's a very specific text question.
Right.
It's an international initiative by OECD, which Malaysia is a participating member of it. Obviously, the more matured countries, I would agree that they are ready for it, which is basically looking at global minimum tax of 15%. Obviously, today Malaysia tax rate is way above the 15%. We shouldn't have an issue in terms of managing it. But obviously, when you bring in incentives, Labuan and all this, then obviously the effective tax rates will be different. I guess what is more important is at the end of the day, Malaysia has to look at the policy. It's a good global initiative policy. We have to look at the policy from our own Malaysian consumption perspective. How effective and how much positive contribution will it give it back to us, number one. And number two is, and to be fair, the global rules and guidelines for this has not been out yet. So to be able to participate in it, to know what's the impact and what's the impact to Malaysia, MOF, who's going to execute the policy, and the government, I think very much we need to make sure that the global policies are out so that it becomes a level playing field across everybody to be able to make sure that we're able to participate in it. Again, like I said, even countries like Singapore and Hong Kong has decided to defer it until 2025. We want to do it in 2024, but the question is, are we ready? That's always a question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Bernard. I hope that answers the question that our online viewer has actually posed to us. We have received another question, which is, can you highlight what are the opportunities that the insurance and Takaful industry can leverage on from this year budget? I think Encik Termizi has given a very in-depth view on this question, but I would just like to ask maybe Mr. Bernard and Encik Faris, is there anything that you would like to add for this question?
Well, I think on the specific point of view, there are quite a few measures that have been taken that are specific to Takaful. Right?
Mm.
But I guess we also have to look into a broader, from the broader point of view, we have to see what the government is trying to encourage at the moment, right? From the ESG angle, right? Digitalization of certain businesses, right? So I think to a certain effect, it would affect the Takaful business, the operations of Takaful business, and also the dimension of the Takaful products that will be issued in the market, right? And also, Encik Tamizi highlighted a few of the previous budget's initiative, whereby to address to encourage the taking up of Takaful between certain segments of the people, right? So from my point of view, I guess a more detailed initiative needs to be probably spelled out in the budget to address certain segments, especially in relation to Takaful, right? At the moment, it's being kept open to a certain extent, and well, yeah, that sums up my view.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bernard?
I just want to add on, I think Encik Tamizi brought up a very good point in his illustration earlier. It's more important that the government on an annual basis through budget, right, comes out with the right allocations, come up with the right subsidies and opportunities given to the corporate and also to the community. I think what's more important is how effective can we carry it out and execute that mandate. That example Encik Tamizi given was that if you look at the coverage, at one point when it was introduced, it's only less than 0.5%. But it's the awareness that has been created, the value that is behind it, and the agenda why this is important for the community. And I think if we can get that across, then the effectiveness of applying and using the allocation given in the budget, that becomes a very important part of it. It's always a journey. And I guess the other part, we also, as not only just with the Ministry of Finance, all of us have to also look at every year we evaluate, keep our own KPI. What has been introduced? How effective was it? And maybe we learn from it. Why wasn't it effective when the original plan and idea came up and introduced in the budget? Why wasn't it effective at the end of the year? And we then need to fine tune and make sure that the community is able to benefit from these allocations. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm glad to note that there is a lot of interest in the webinar that is happening now from our online viewers. We have been receiving a lot of questions, so I'm going to read the next one. The health industry received the second highest budget allocation. Now, while this looks generous, but does it address the urgent needs of the public healthcare sector for both the short and long term? So any volunteers to take this question?
Probably I'll take from a specific dimension, right? So in terms of whether it's sufficient or not, I believe there are certain form of studies being conducted by the government to ensure that a certain amount of budget to be allocated. Of course, I think this year's budget allocated for health, if I'm not mistaken, is about 2% of our GDP as compared to the targeted, I would say earlier, I think the previous health minister wanted to have about 5%. But nevertheless, I think there are certain other initiatives that are being offered by the government. I think one of the angles that they are looking at is to provide a certain level of healthcare for especially the less fortunate one. I think one of the angle that specifically addressed in the budget is the charitable hospital. Right? You know, the charitable hospital, although it's privately managed at the moment, right? And the target segment for this charitable hospital are for the less fortunate. And I think in the budget there have been some proposals to provide tax exemption on the income of the charitable hospital, right? And at the same time, also on the contribution made by the public to this charitable hospital. So I think that's one of the angle, or specifically that could be beneficial for the people at large.
Okay, so thank you so much, Encik Faris. And I will move on directly to the next question. It looks quite complicated. Okay, would like to ask about the income tax increase for T20. We were just talking about this actually before the webinar started. So for taxable income about 100K, there will be an increased tax rate of 0.5 to 2%. The Finance Ministry also mentioned that for people with gross income below 230K, they will not be affected with this increase. As such, can you clarify what that can you clarify that does it mean that the Finance Ministry meant most of these people not affected have tax relief of 130K? Is this correct? I'm not sure. Do you want me to repeat the question? It's quite long.
No, I'll start first.
Okay,
Yeah.
right.
All right.
The Malaysian tax system for individuals are graduated tax brackets.
Yes.
So it goes at every level, the higher you earn, obviously the tax rate goes up.
Yeah.
The prescribed, firstly, I think the prescribed reduction in the tax rates between, I think it's 40 or 50,000 to 100,000, there were 2% dropped. So that itself, for the first 100,000, there would already been some form of tax savings for those in that bracket. And then once you go above the 100,000, there would then be the increase in the tax rates. So I think when the Ministry of Finance look at it, if you look at it up to the 250,000, the savings in the lower bracket will compensate back to the increase in it, and therefore it neutralizes the effect of the increase in the tax rate as compared to the lower bracket. I think that's what it's meant. And then anything above the 250, obviously then at the higher bracket, which meant that the T20 would then have to pay more taxes based on the income level that they have.
Yeah, just to add on Bernard's point, as well, if you look at it, the income of less than 100,000, right, will be given a reduction, right? And although it said that it is mentioned that income above 100,000 will have an increase of 2%, right? But if you put it into a tax computation, that the actual impact will be those that earn more than 230,000 will only suffer the additional tax, right? So I think that's from a layman point of view. And if you look at it, the impact of it is that based on the statistics that the government have at the moment, it should affect about 150,000 taxpayers, right? Whereas in the reduction in tax for the M40 level, right, it should benefit to approximately about 2.4 million of taxpayers in Malaysia. So I guess the benefit to the rakyat, the M40, is
much
more. Right? And like Robin Hood, T20 to M40.
All right. Okay. Now, there seems to be a lot of interest from the listeners on income tax. So we have another income tax question here. So this listener has actually asked, would like to ask, the income tax increase of 2%, correct me if I'm wrong, it starts from those have monthly income of 8,500, which falls in the M40 category and above.
So I think it's the same, almost the same question.
Yeah.
At 8,000, you're, like I said earlier, the bracket, you'll be able to enjoy the 2% reduction.
Okay.
But if you don't hit like Shifra said, about 230, you will not then have that incremental impact of the tax.
Okay,
Yeah.
so thank you very much. And I think that this question is so specific, 8,500. You know, the amount that it was given here is 8,500. So whoever the listener asks this question, you will be glad to know that you are actually eligible for the 2% income tax cut. All right, moving on to the next question. I think this one is a bit more, okay. Malaysia has been known to have a high level of brain drain in the region. Will this Robin Hood budget, as mentioned by the speaker, increase the brain drain further?
I think the brain drain and everything is at the end of the day based on the overall ecosystem of the country. It's not solely on tax.
Budget.
Yeah. Earlier we talked about how it's very important now. The government focuses on trying to manage increasing cost of living, cost of doing business, and also recovery from post-pandemic. Yeah. If the next 12 months, the outlook is very positive because of the fact that everything is opening up. Like I said, world tourism is coming back, the global tourism coming back. I think the opportunities for Malaysia is there. I guess that's what's more important moving forward is we talk about the large organization, the GLC, the MNCs, the listed codes. They are very, my favorite word, right? Automated and digitalized. If we can build SME towards that, then obviously the opportunities for all of the Malaysians working overseas, they want to come back because we are considered to be as on par with the mature developed countries. As the obviously again the GLCs and MNCs take lead in the the environmentally the ESG projects. We're also going to be on par with the Europeans and Americans, Australians, and so therefore it also gives opportunity to the SMEs to then be able to participate with the pioneer who's taking the lead in the ESG. So I think what's more important is we continue to develop and improve ourselves within the economy and within the country, and therefore hence I mentioned about the technical and vocational institutions plays an important role to build up our expertise so that then there are more and more people wanting to come back to this country because they can contribute much more better. And for us, the ultimate is not to actually rely on foreign workers. We rely on our own selves, our own country for that purpose.
Puan Lin.
Yeah.
So if I can add, I think the issue of brain drain for the Takaful and insurance industry is something that is that should be getting more concern. Even because it goes back to I think this is a structural issue for the Takaful and insurance industry. First of all, we are competing for the best talents with those from the industries of financial institutions and also asset management. Also, for example, the big four firms. So and then once these talents actually go and then go to the industry, of insurance and industry, it actually you can see that it actually goes all the way up, from the board of directors, senior management, and also to the the mid-level managers. So in terms of the brain drain, we have seen a lot of these talented people, especially young talented people in Malaysia. They actually go to Singapore or to the Middle East markets. Even some of the brightest talent, they actually went to London, which is a major insurance market for the world. So I believe this is something that needs to be addressed in terms of the incentives given to the talents to stay here. And also we are looking at the structural reform for the industry, because if you look at the risk in Malaysia, they are priced based on tariff, even though there have been a partial de-tariffication, but it has not been fully de-tariffed yet. So there is no incentive, in fact, there's no mechanism for these talents who study actual science, for example, who study underwriting, to when they assess the risk in Malaysia, they are not properly priced, they're not properly assessed. Because it's basically you just refer to the tariff table. Okay? So these people, eventually they get frustrated because they want to be challenged, and then obviously the monetary compensation is higher in certain countries, so they move to other countries. So this is a structural reform that I think needs to be addressed. If it's not the budget, but on the industrial level.
Right. Thank you so much.
Well,
Yes,
allow me
Haris.
to add a few points that on the brain drain question, right? So I guess we have to also look into the impact of this brain drain since the pandemic hit us, right? So a lot of there are I would say some of us who have moved from from the salaried employment kind of career, have moved into a more informal kind of economy, like gig economy. And at the same time, also, like for example, certain working mothers, right, had to leave their job and focus on the family. But now we are at the post-pandemic recovery, right? And I can see that the government also are looking into this dimension. Right? Therefore, you can see like certain initiatives being targeted towards the MSMEs, right? To support this gig economy, informal economy that many Malaysians are already involved nowadays, right? And also provide incentives to encourage working mothers or mothers who have left the industry back then to come back to the workforce. So these are some of the initiatives that the government have put in place. And of course, from emotional point of view, I guess that's probably not specifically addressed in the budget. So it's something the society probably needs to support each other in addressing those aspects.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I like that. The society should support each other. Yeah. All right. Okay. The next question that we have: would the introduction of global minimum tax be impacting the reinsurance or Takaful companies that operate globally, since the company is currently taxed at 8%?
Very, very good point. I guess the reinsurance business is a very, very unique, specialized industry. I mean, within the insurance and Takaful industry, the reinsurance and Takaful is already a very unique and specialized one, right?
Yes.
Like I said, we have to wait for the global guidelines and rules to come out. How that is going to impact the specific industry and whether there's any exclusion or exemption out of it. And then we will be able to only comment from it. Like I said, right now, it's very high level. Until OECD comes out with the global rules, I think then it's easier for all the participating countries to be able to then work together and collaborate together and see how that impact is going to be.
Right. Okay, so it's not something that we can actually pinpoint at the moment accurately.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, this is another question regarding the tax rate on T20, but this is from a different angle. Yeah. So targeted to increase tax rate on T20, would you agree with me that this approach would you agree with me that with this approach, it will discourage the expatriates to move to Malaysia?
Allow me to take the question.
Thank you.
If you ask me personally, I would not agree totally to that point. Right. So increase in tax rates would, I wouldn't say it's very, very significant for the T20, right? And from another angle, we to attract expatriates, that's very good thing. And I think is to attract the right expatriates into Malaysia is also another issue, right? And of which the government have like Bernard mentioned, more targeted nowadays, not to be more generalist, more targeted, specific to certain industry, certain, I think there is this incentives available to attract relocation of businesses into Malaysia, I think specifically in the manufacturing industry, right? And the C-suites level of this, I would say, companies would enjoy a preferential tax rate of 15%. Right? So these are, some of the initiatives by the government to attract the right amount of expatriates or the right dimension or segments of expatriates. And in addition to well, tax should not be just the measure or encouragement or even discouragement for expats to come to Malaysia, right? There are also
A lot of
various
other factors.
other factors.
All right, thank you so much. Right. And we have another question here. The government budget to allocate 500 ringgit to those whose EPF holders less than 10K is good. But does this incentivize those who have made withdrawals during the 4 special EPF withdrawals and penalize those who did not make the withdrawals where their EPF stays above 10K? So I think they're questioning a bit of disparity here, apparently.
It goes back to the main objective of the budget, which is a progressive. We didn't want the challenges that we faced in the last 2 years in COVID. We didn't ask for it, right? The B40s have to adapt, have to learn to mitigate the concerns and the issues. Obviously, the withdrawal of EPF is for their own livelihood in terms of surviving through the COVID. And hence, therefore, I guess this initiative is recontribution back or redirecting back the contribution from the T20s and maybe also from the M40s back to the B40s. I mean, at the end of the day, if you look at it in the long term and in the long run, if the B40s are not able to adapt and survive throughout the whole time, the overall Malaysian economy will suffer. It's not just the B40 will suffer. The overall economy will suffer. Then we look at situation when then there could be high inflation rate because of that. Social security will be an issue. The economy will be impacted. Inflationary interest rates. All this will come into it. So hence, therefore, I think the government is looking at it from let's stabilize and recover first from post-pandemic, and we move forward from there. And after all, it's only a once-off. It's not to say this is going to be a permanent thing that will come into it.
Right. So give time for the economy to recover first before we put in some meatier stuff, yeah? All right, I think that was actually the last question that we have received online for now. But, we have been gaining so much knowledge, so much enlightenment and appreciation for the budget that I would actually like to pose a final question, which I would appreciate if each of the panelists would give their views, right? And the question is, okay, what will we see from the financial bill that will be released in mid-2023? Yeah. And if it is released in mid of 2023, wouldn't it be effective for only like a couple of months because the new budget will already be due at the end of the year? And also, what would be areas in the budget that perhaps we haven't spoken about but deserve special attention? And what is your wish list for the next budget that will be released at the end of this year or early next year?
I guess I just want to correct that part. The finance bill, we're expecting it to come up in the middle of March, not the middle of the year. So we have the transitional provisions now that allows all the government agencies to continue BAU. Obviously, certain large projects and large procurement projects need specific approvals, but otherwise it shouldn't have a major impact. Otherwise, then our sovereign ratings and everything will go down because of the fact that you cannot be doing and continue for the last few months without any mandate, any approval. So it shouldn't have any major impact from a government and from a Malaysian economy perspective. I don't want to cover in terms of what's missing from the budget. I think it's more important is let's make sure that those who are able to benefit from the budget, please go out, do the right thing, get yourself entitled, whether it's the subsidies, the location, the loans, and any other assistance and support that the Malaysian government is putting up in the budget. The awareness and everything is going to be very important. This is the year that, like I said, we're fully recovering out of it. it's very important especially for the SMEs. You strengthen your financial position, your economic position, so that when next year, what I'm hoping for, the wish list is from next year onwards, we should be much more balanced and ready to go for bigger projects. The Malaysian government should be targeting a lot more FDIs coming back into the country. We should then be hoping that we should not be spending money in terms of trying to stabilize the economy, but growing the economy. Hopefully, there's a few more projects or infrastructure projects that is available, because when the government, as a public, takes initiative in terms of these projects, there will always be a partnership with the private sector, and that will give a much more boost and positive multiplier effect to the economy. So I'm hoping that will be that next year, and the SMEs are ready in terms of making sure that they're able to participate in that contribution and that growth in the economy from 2024 onwards. So that's from my perspective.
Right. Encik Faris, how about yourself?
Yeah, I think Bernard has covered most of the thing that I wanted to say. Yeah. But I guess I think it's I echo on the point of awareness, right? So government agencies as well as the tax authorities needs to create a lot of awareness on certain benefits that the rakyat will enjoy under the budget, and provide a proper channel for them to enjoy these benefits, right? And I think also on the development part, as you can see, this year's budget are more targeted to specific industry, not so many mega projects being announced, right? I think Malaysia have enough large buildings at the moment, or a lot of big developments at the moment. The focus is to recover and also rebuilding these earlier initiatives, and focus on the MSMEs at the moment, right? And I think I would say my wish list for next year, right? Looking at the current year's budget, it should elevate the rakyat. For more B40 becomes M40, and more M40 becomes T20, right? So the target for I think the target for next year is to have a less, I would say, a more progressive, even more progressive than this year's budget, right? To address fully on the development of the nation, right? Rather than just recovery.
Okay. Encik Tumizi?
Okay, I think most of the points have been covered by my fellow panelists, but I think from the Takaful and insurance industry point of view, there are a few wish lists and also perhaps opportunities that the industry can benefit from. I would say that the first point in terms of the micro insurance at the national level, I think is still crucial. Because we have seen the success story from the Perlindungan Tenang Voucher Fund, increasing the penetration rate from 0.5% to close to 50% of the B40 segment. So I hope this can be replicated, perhaps reintroduced in the next budget. And then we're also looking forward in terms of the clarity on the details on the Pekeso Lindung Plus collaboration with the insurance and Takaful operators. And also in terms of the current expansion of that voluntary EPF contribution, but currently Islam together with Life Insurance Family Takaful. So perhaps this could be a temporary measure, but if this continues, perhaps next year could be expanded and split into two. Also in terms of the flood risk, the protection gap remains staggering. So there needs to be concerted effort at the national level to address this protection gap for flood. So perhaps the reintroduction of that Perlindungan Tenang will also cover the scope of flood risk, and also the formulation of a national flood pool could be something that be seriously considered by the industry and government. Also, I've also noticed in terms of the allocation for the SMEs. So it's close to maybe 5 to 6 billions. So if usually when want to get a loan from the banks, they will either apply, they would usually put a certain conditions such as, requiring the collateral. And also on top of that, they will assess the worthiness, the viability of your business plan, also your credit risk, your credit worthiness. So perhaps one way to add another layer of risk management to this loan, to this grant or soft loan disbursement by government to these entrepreneurs is actually getting them or encourage them to actually subscribe to the business interruption insurance or Takaful scheme. I think the final words is that I think kudos to the government because they introduced this, they actually listened to the rakyat for coming up with this fiscally responsible, inclusive and rakyat-centric budget. Even though for the industry, there could be some people in the industry that might be feeling that this current budget lacks some of the goodies from the previous budgets. But I think the onus is actually for the industry to collectively work together and be resourceful, embrace innovation. And then we have to continue, providing products and services and solutions that are of value to our customers. Because I totally believe that as long as those products are of value to the customers, they will continue supporting and purchasing them. So that's all from my side.
All right. Thank you so much. So, wonderful. All right. With that, we actually come to the close of our webinar today. We hope that our viewers have actually enjoyed it and found it beneficial. And to our panelists, our three distinguished esteemed panelists, we cannot thank you enough for agreeing to be the panelists on this webinar and for coming in this morning and for answering all the questions and providing us, the layman, with better insights and appreciation of the budget 2023. So, and thank you all those who have joined the webinar online. Assalamualaikum and thank you. Bye.